Experts do predict tremendous legal fallout, though, from this tragedy. And while authorities today said it is too soon to determine charges in this case and who charges may be filed against, the Santa Fe County District Attorney said it is still very much a possibility, as you heard there. And if a Hollywood star like Alec Baldwin is eventually charged, what kind of case would he have as an executive producer of this production? Rachel Fiset is a criminal defense attorney in LA, and she joins me now. I think this is a big what if, but there is certainly a legal case to be made here, Rachel. If charged, what do you expect Alec Baldwin's defense to be?
Well, I think if Alec Baldwin is charged, what they will have charged him with is basically that he would have been the person overseeing the production. So he would be the lead producer in charge. And the lead producer is where the buck stops on set productions. So what they would charge him with is some sort of negligence based on what he was allowing to go on the set. The recreational target practice, all of these things that you're mentioning, the breach of safety protocols, the camera crew walking off, the 500 rounds of ammunition that they are saying they found. These are facts that would suggest that safety protocols were not being followed on the set. And at some point, there is a leader in charge of that. Now, if Alec Baldwin is simply a money person on this set and there is some other producer or someone else that would be charged with the lead role of overseeing what's happening on the set, that would be his defense. He would say, I wasn't in charge of operations. I didn't have any kind of knowledge. I was not boots on the ground. I was indeed just acting in this show and funding it. So he would probably point the finger at someone else who would have that type of job.
So understanding his authority, his oversight on this particular production. Well, if you're representing Alec Baldwin right now, you're part of his defense team. What are you advising him to do?
I'm advising him to cooperate, but that would be with a lot of legal counsel with pretty thought out statements. I would be advising him to think of what he knew and didn't know, to think of whose hands he had put responsibility in, and to show that he wasn't really, and safety wasn't his job. That was somebody else's job.
What about this other producer who admits he didn't check the gun, and the armorer who clearly some responsibility lays on that person on a set? What charges would they face?
So Halls is the assistant director on the set. Often it is the assistant director who is in charge of operations. And Halls has made a pretty big admission in saying he didn't check the gun, yet he yelled cold gun. That is, to me, a pretty large admission that he made while cooperating. As his attorney, I probably would have advised against speaking to authorities, knowing how close he was to this shooting at this point. So he, I think, could have culpability in that way. He has some bad facts relating to prior sets he's been on and other complaints made as it relates directly to safety. Mm-hmm. So he's got to overcome that hurdle and downplay what we're hearing, what is reported as other complaints about safety in other situations.
Rachel, before I let you go, I just want to get in one more question here, and I think this is important because this has happened before. As you know, a high-profile case when Brandon Lee was killed on a set in 1993. I'm curious if they were able to establish any legal precedent in that case to prevent what we saw unfold in the last week.
So Brandon Lee, there was a criminal investigation into his death, and there were no charges filed in that case. So to the extent that sets some precedent, there is that they did not find negligence that would rise to a criminal standard in his case.
Wow. So many details. I know this is going to take a lot of time. Rachel, as always, appreciate your legal insight. Thank you.
Thank you.